The rain fell in sheets across the city as Nisha settled into her favorite corner booth at Joey's Pizzeria. The worn red vinyl seat had molded to her shape over countless Friday nights. Thunder crashed outside, but inside, the small restaurant buzzed with the comfortable sounds of plates clinking and people laughing. For Nisha, this weekly pizza was the one bright spot after her exhausting double shifts at City Hospital. "Here you go, honey. Pepperoni with extra cheese, just how you like it," said Flo, the waitress who'd been serving Nisha for the past 3 years. Flo's gray hair was piled high in a bun that somehow never moved even when she rushed between tables. "Thanks, Flo." "You're a lifesaver," Nisha said, inhaling the smell of melted cheese and spicy pepperoni. Her stomach growled loudly, reminding her that she'd skipped lunch to cover for a coworker. As a nurse in the pediatric ward, Nisha's days were filled with tiny patients who needed her strength and smile. Some days were harder than others, and today had been particularly tough. Little Raj, just 4 years old and fighting leukemia, had taken a turn for the worse. Nisha had stayed an hour past her shift, holding his mother's hand while the doctors worked. The first bite of pizza tasted like heaven. Nisha closed her eyes and savored it, letting the flavors wash away some of the day's stress. She watched. Raindrops raced down the window, making bets with herself about which one would reach the bottom first. After finishing most of her pizza, Nisha saved the last slice, her favorite part with the perfect crust-to-topping ratio. Just as she was about to take a bite, the bell above the door jingled, and a gust of wet wind blew in along with an older man. He stood in the doorway, dripping water onto the checkered floor. His gray hair was plastered to his head, and his expensive-looking coat hung heavy with rainwater. But it wasn't his drenched appearance that caught Nisha's attention. It was his eyes. They carried a weariness that went beyond physical tiredness, the kind that comes from carrying something heavy inside for far too long. The man looked around the packed pizzeria. Every table was full of friends laughing, couples on dates, and families sharing meals. He seemed lost, like he didn't belong anywhere in the room. Flo approached him with menus in hand. "Just you tonight, sir?" When he nodded, she glanced around the crowded restaurant and frowned. "I'm afraid we're packed. Tight. Might be a 20-minute wait." The man's shoulders slumped slightly. "I understand. Thank you anyway." His voice was soft but rich, with the kind of polish that comes from good education. He turned toward the door, ready to head back into the storm. Without thinking, Nisha raised her hand. "Excuse me," she called out. "You can sit here if you'd like. I'm almost done." The word surprised even her. Normally, after a long shift, the last thing she wanted was company. The man turned, eyebrows raised in surprise. "Are you certain? I wouldn't want to intrude." "I'm sure," Nisha said, gesturing to the empty seat across from her. "No one should have to go back out in that weather." With a grateful nod, the man made his way to her booth. Up close, she noticed the fine quality of his rain-soaked clothes and the expensive watch peeking out from his sleeve. He moved carefully, like someone used to being watched. "I'm Edward," he said, extending his hand across the table. "Nisha," she replied, shaking it. His grip was firm, but gentle. Flo appeared with a menu and a sympathetic smile. "Can I get you something to drink while you decide, sir?" "Just coffee, please, black." Edward removed his wet coat and folded it neatly beside him. As he studied the menu, Nisha noticed the lines around his eyes deepen. He looked exhausted, the kind of tired that sleep alone couldn't fix. Without really knowing why, she slid her plate with the last pizza slice toward him. "Here," she said. "You look like you could use this more than me." Edward glanced up, startled. "Oh, I couldn't possibly." "Please," Nisha insisted. "It's just one slice of pizza. And honestly, my eyes are always bigger than my stomach." This wasn't entirely true. She'd been looking forward to that last slice, but something told her it was the right thing to do. Edward studied her face, as if checking whether the offer was genuine. "Thank you," he finally said, accepting the yaw plate. "That's very kind." "It's nothing." Nisha shrugged. suddenly embarrassed by his formal gratitude for such a small gesture. Edward took a small bite of the pizza, chewing thoughtfully. "This is quite good," he said, sounding almost surprised. "Best in the city," Nisha agreed. "Been coming here every Friday for 3 years." 3 years of the same pizza at the same place? Edward asked, a hint of a smile softening his tired face. "When you find something good, why change?" Nisha said, then added with a laugh. "Plus, it's the only treat I can afford on a nurse's salary." Something flickered in Edward's eyes. Interest, perhaps. "You're a nurse?" Nisha nodded. "At City Hospital, pediatric ward." "That must be challenging," Edward said carefully. "Some days are harder than others," Nisha admitted. Today was one of the rough ones. She didn't usually share with strangers, but there was something about Edward that made talking easy. As Edward finished the pizza slice, Flo returned with his coffee. "Anything else for you, sir?" Edward glanced at Nisha, then back to Flo. "I'd like to order a full pizza, please, whatever kind the lady recommends." He turned to Nisha. "If you're willing to stay a bit longer, I'd appreciate the company." Nisha hesitated, then smiled. "The Joey's special is amazing, sausage, mushrooms, and their secret sauce." "That sounds perfect," Edward told Flo. As Flo walked away, Nisha studied the strange man across from her. There was a depth to him, a mystery. His clothes and manner spoke of wealth, but his eyes held a sadness that all the money in the world couldn't seem to fix. What Nisha couldn't possibly know was that across from her sat Edward Patel, whose name graced office buildings and luxury hotels throughout the city. His real estate empire was worth billions, not millions. But for all his wealth, Edward had been searching for something that had eluded him for decades, something that money couldn't buy. And on this rainy Friday night, in a crowded pizza place, a nurse's simple act of kindness had caught him completely off guard. The morning after meeting Nisha at the pizzeria, Edward Patel woke up in his penthouse on the 52nd floor of the Heights, the luxury building he had developed himself 5 years earlier. The rain had cleared, and sunlight streamed through floor-to-ceiling windows that offered sweeping views of the city skyline, a city where he owned more than 30 properties. Edward shuffled to the kitchen in his slippers, the marble floors, cold beneath his feet despite the underfloor heating that cost more than what most people earned in a month. He made his own coffee, something his household staff found puzzling. They arrived at 9 each morning, but Edward had been making his own breakfast since Sunita died. His wife had always been the early riser, preparing chai the traditional way, the smell filling their home with cardamom and ginger. 15 years without her, and still the mornings felt empty. At 72, Edward had built his real estate empire from scratch. The son of immigrants who ran a small grocery store, he'd worked his way through college, then spotted opportunities where others saw only decay. He bought his first abandoned warehouse at 27, converted it to lofts, and never looked back. Now, his company, Patel Properties, transformed entire neighborhoods, with developments known for their quality and vision. But success had come at a steep price. Edward carried his coffee to his home office, where a wall of photos told the story of his life. There was one from the opening of his first major development. Edward stood proudly beside Sunita, their smiles wide with possibility. Another showed their son Vikram graduating from business school. Edward had expected Vikram would join the family business, continuing what he had built. It hadn't worked out that way. He stopped at the last family photo ever taken, Vikram's wedding 8 years ago. In it, Edward stood slightly apart from his son and new daughter-in-law, his smile tight. 6 months after that, the final argument happened. Words were said that couldn't be taken back. Now Vikram lived on the other side of the country with his wife and 2 children, grandchildren Edward had never met. "You were never there when it mattered," Vikram had shouted during their last fight. "Mom spent her final years lonely because your buildings always came first. I won't make my family pay the same price." The words still burned after all this time. Edward's phone buzzed with messages from his executive team. 3 projects needed his approval. A zoning meeting required his attendance, and investors were anxious about the new development downtown. Once, these problems would have energized him. Now they just felt hollow. For the past 6 months, Edward had been doing something his company's board would find bizarre. 3 times a week he told his driver to drop him in different neighborhoods, places where no one would recognize him. He visited small cafes, local bookshops, and family restaurants, places where people lived ordinary lives. He wasn't entirely sure what he was looking for. Connection, perhaps. In his usual world of boardrooms and charity galas, everyone wanted something from him. They saw his wealth, his influence, his power, but nobody really saw him, except for Nisha last night. The way she had offered him that last slice of pizza, not because he was Edward Patel, the real estate magnate, but simply because she thought he looked like he needed kindness. The gesture had caught him completely off guard. Edward got dressed in one of his hand-tailored suits and headed to his office downtown. The building bore his name in discreet gold lettering. His employees nodded respectfully as he passed, their eyes averted. His assistant Priya hurried alongside him, tablet in hand. "The mayor called again about the riverfront project," she said, struggling to keep up with his long strides. "And the architects need your final approval on the changes to the West Tower." Edward nodded absently. "Schedule the mayor for tomorrow. I'll review the plans this afternoon." The day unfolded as they always did. Meetings, decisions, problems, solved with the efficiency of someone who had been doing this for decades. But his mind kept drifting back to Joey's Pizzeria and the nurse with the kind eyes. During a break between meetings, Edward found himself searching online for city hospitals, pediatric ward. There it was, underfunded like most public hospitals, doing vital work with too few resources. He made a mental note, then closed the browser before Priya could see. That evening, instead of having his driver take him home, Edward asked to be dropped near Joey's Pizzeria again. He wasn't sure why. The chances of Nisha being there 2 nights in a row were slim. Still, he felt drawn to the place where, for a brief moment, he had experienced something genuine. The restaurant was quieter tonight, half empty in the lull between the after-work and dinner crowds. Flo recognized him immediately. "Back again?" she asked, eyebrows raised in surprise. "No Nisha tonight. She only comes on Fridays. That's her special treat after payday." Edward tried to hide his disappointment. "I enjoyed the pizza," he said, simply taking a seat at the counter instead of a booth. Flo studied him with the shrewd assessment of someone who had been serving people for decades. "You're not what you seem, are you?" she asked, pouring him coffee without being asked. Edward glanced up, startled. "What do you mean?" "Nobody who wears a watch like that just happens to wander in here 2 days in a row," she said, nodding toward his wrist. "But don't worry, your secret's safe with me, whatever it is." For the first time in days, Edward laughed, a real laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who's been watching people as long as I have," Flo said with a wink. "Now what can I get you?" Edward ordered a small pizza, eating slowly as he watched the normal rhythms of the restaurant. A young couple on what was clearly a first date, nervous and trying too hard. A mother with 2 teenagers, all 3 glued to their phones. A group of office workers unwinding after a long day. Ordinary moments. Real life. Everything he had sacrificed in his relentless pursuit of success. As he paid his bill, Edward made a decision. He would come back on Friday. He wasn't sure what he was hoping for, but for the first time in years he felt something like anticipation. The following Friday arrived with a gentle spring rain, nothing like the downpour of the week before. Edward found himself checking his watch repeatedly throughout the day, his mind wandering during important meetings. By late afternoon, his assistant Priya noticed his distraction. "Is everything all right, Mr. Patel?" she asked after he missed a question during a conference call. "You seem a bit elsewhere today." Edward waved away her concern. "Just tired, Priya. Would you clear my evening schedule? I have some personal matters to attend to." Personal matters. The phrase felt strange in his mouth. When was the last time he'd had truly personal matters? His life had become so predictable. Work, charity events, solitary dinners, and sleepless nights in his enormous penthouse. But tonight was different. Tonight he might see Nisha again. At 6:30, Edward's driver dropped him a block from Joey's Pizzeria. He had dressed down deliberately, a simple button-up shirt, no tie, and slacks that weren't custom-tailored. He even wore the old leather jacket that Sunita had given him decades ago, something he usually kept in the back of his closet for sentimental reasons. Through the window, he spotted her immediately. Same corner booth, same tired but content expression. Something lightened in his chest at the sight. He took a deep breath before pushing open the door, suddenly feeling like a nervous teenager rather than a man who regularly negotiated multi-million-dollar deals without breaking a sweat. The bell jingled above him as he entered. Flo caught his eye from behind the counter and gave him a knowing wink. Nisha looked up from her menu, surprise flickering across her face before transforming into a warm smile. "Edward, I didn't expect to see you again," she said as he approached her booth. "I was in the neighborhood," he lied, sliding into the seat across from her. "Hope you don't mind the company." "Not at all. Friday night pizza is better shared," Nisha replied, setting down her menu. She looked different today. Her long, dark hair was down instead of pulled back, and she wore a simple blue dress instead of scrubs. "No emergency shift tonight?" Edward liked that she remembered their conversation from the previous week. "Just finished for the day, you're not in your nurse clothes." Nisha laughed, the sound genuine and unrehearsed. "Scrubs, you mean?" "No, I switched shifts with another nurse so I could attend my daughter's school play tonight. She's playing a tree." "A tree?" Edward raised an eyebrow. "A very important tree," Nisha said with mock seriousness. "According to Zara, her tree provides crucial shade for the talking animals." Her eyes softened. "She's 7 and takes every role very seriously." Edward tried to imagine this little girl practicing her tree stance at home. The image made him smile. "Sounds like quite the production." "Oh, it will be 30 minutes of beautiful chaos. 25 second graders forgetting lines and parents pretending it's Broadway." The affection in her voice was palpable. Flo appeared at their table, notepad in hand. "Well, look who's back." "The usual Nisha?" When Nisha nodded, Flo turned to Edward. "And for you, sir?" "I'll have whatever she's having," Edward said. After Flo left, he turned back to Nisha. "So, a daughter who's serious about her theatrical tree performances. Tell me more about her." And just like that, the conversation flowed. Nisha told him about Zara's recent obsession with space, how she wanted to be an astronaut doctor when she grew up. Edward found himself enchanted by stories of homework struggles, bedtime negotiations, and the pure joy of watching a child discover the world. "What about you?" Nisha asked after their pizzas arrived. "Any children?" The question sent a familiar pang through Edward's chest. "A son," he said quietly. "Vikram. We're not close anymore." Something in his tone must have communicated the weight behind those words, because Nisha didn't press for details. Instead, she simply said, "I'm sorry to hear that. Family relationships can be complicated." The simple acknowledgement, free of judgment, loosened something in Edward. He found himself talking about Vikram's childhood, the good parts before everything fell apart, the camping trips they used to take, the model airplanes they built together, teaching him to ride a bike in the park. "You sound like you were a good father," Nisha observed, taking a sip of her soda. Edward shook his head. "I tried, but work always came first. I convinced myself I was doing it for him, building something he could be proud of. By the time I realized what really mattered, it was too late." Nisha considered this, her eyes thoughtful. "It's never too late until it's too late, you know? As long as you're both still here, there's always a chance." Her words hung between them, simple but profound. Edward wanted to believe her, but reconciliation felt impossible after all these years of silence. They finished their pizzas, and Edward checked the time. "Don't you have a theatrical tree performance to attend?" "I do," Nisha said, reaching for her purse. "It starts at 8. Edward waved away her attempt to pay. "Please let me. Consider it thanks for the conversation." After a brief argument that Edward won, they walked outside together. The spring rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the streetlights. "How are you getting to the school?" Edward asked. Bus, Nisha said, pointing to the stop, across the street. It comes every 15 minutes. Edward hesitated, then made a decision. I have a car. I could give you a ride if you'd like. Nisha looked surprised. You don't have to do that. I know. But I'd like to, Edward said, surprised to discover he meant it. The thought of extending their time together appealed to him more than he wanted to admit. After a moment's consideration, Nisha nodded. That would be nice, thank you. Edward texted his driver, who appeared within minutes in a sleek black car. He saw Nisha's eyes widen slightly at the luxury vehicle, but appreciated that she didn't comment on it. On the drive to the elementary school, Nisha pointed out landmarks in her neighborhood. The library where Zara attended story time, the park with the best swings, the corner store run by an elderly couple who always gave children free candy on Fridays. It was a world entirely different from Edward's usual circles, yet there was something deeply appealing about its simplicity and authenticity. When they arrived, at the school, parents and excited children were streaming into the gymnasium. Edward suddenly felt reluctant to end the evening. Would it be presumptuous to ask if I could watch the play? He asked, surprising himself. I haven't seen a second grade production in decades. I find myself curious about this important tree. Nisha laughed, her eyes crinkling at the corners. Not presumptuous at all. Zara would be thrilled to have another audience member. Just be prepared. School chairs weren't designed for adult comfort. They walked into the brightly decorated gymnasium. Edward felt strangely out of place, yet perfectly content. Tonight he wasn't Edward Patel, wealthy developer. He was just Edward, a friend attending a school play about talking animals and very important trees. The school play was everything Edward had expected and more. 25 children forgot lines, sang off key, and beamed with pride while parents recorded every moment on their phones. Zara, true to her mother's words, took her role as a tree very seriously. She stood perfectly still with her arms stretched wide, providing crucial shade for talking rabbits and squirrels. Only once did she break character, when she spotted her mother in the audience and waved excitedly. Sitting on an uncomfortable plastic chair beside Nisha, Edward felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Simple joy. No business deals, no networking, no pretense, just pure, unfiltered life happening all around him. After the performance, a small girl with Nisha's eyes and a wild tangle of curls ran to them, still wearing brown pants and a green shirt decorated with paper leaves. Mom, did you see me? I didn't move even when Aditya kept poking me. Zara bounced on her toes, her excitement palpable. You were the best tree I've ever seen, Nisha said, hugging her daughter. Zara, this is my friend Edward. He came to watch your play too. Zara studied him with the direct, unfiltered gaze of a child. Did you like the part where the rabbit got lost? That was the most dramatic moment. Edward nodded seriously. Absolutely riveting. Your shade was clearly essential to the rabbit's eventual rescue. This answer seemed to satisfy Zara, who immediately launched into a detailed explanation of backstage drama involving a misplaced squirrel tail. Edward listened attentively, charmed by her enthusiasm. That night marked a turning point. Over the next few weeks, Edward found himself drawn deeper into Nisha and Zara's world. Friday pizza nights became a regular tradition, sometimes followed by ice cream at the park or a visit to the library. Edward discovered children's books he'd never read, local shops he'd never noticed, and neighborhood spots filled with character that his luxury lifestyle had kept hidden from him. For the first time in decades, Edward felt like himself. Not the wealthy developer, not the businessman, just Edward. A man who enjoyed simple pleasures and good company. One rainy Tuesday afternoon, his assistant Priya noticed him checking his phone and smiling at a text message. You seem different lately, Mr. Patel, she observed. More relaxed. Edward merely shrugged. Just getting a better perspective on things. What he didn't tell her was that the text was from Nisha, sending a photo of Zara's science project. A homemade solar system with planets made from painted styrofoam balls. He didn't mention how he'd spent Sunday afternoon helping them hang the planets from a coat hanger, or how Zara had insisted that Pluto deserved to be included. regardless of what scientists said. These small moments felt precious, almost sacred. Edward kept them private, tucked away from his public life. Then, during their 5th Friday night dinner, Edward noticed something different about Nisha. Her usual warm smile seemed forced, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. She picked at her pizza instead of enjoying it. "Is everything all right?" he asked gently. "You seem troubled tonight." Nisha hesitated, then set down her fork. "I'm sorry, I'm not very good company tonight. It's been a rough week." "Tell me," Edward said simply. Nisha took a deep breath. "It's Zara. She hasn't been feeling well lately. Tired, short of breath. I thought it was just a cold, but..." Her voice caught. "I took her to the doctor yesterday. They did some tests, found something concerning with her heart. We need to see a specialist." Edward felt his own heart tighten. "What kind of heart problem?" "They think it might be a congenital defect, a hole in her heart that wasn't detected when she was born. The doctor said sometimes these things don't show symptoms until children are older." Nisha's hands trembled slightly as she reached for her water. "We see the specialist next week for more tests." "I'm so sorry," Edward said, reaching across the table to take her hand. "Is there anything I can do to help?" Nisha shook her head, attempting a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just being here helps. Talking about normal things. It keeps me from spiraling into worst-case scenarios." They finished dinner talking about lighter topics: Zara's upcoming spelling bee, a funny incident at the hospital involving a missing therapy dog. But Edward could see the worry etched in every line of Nisha's face. The following Thursday, Edward was reviewing plans for a new development when Priya knocked on his office door. "Mr. Patel, Dr. Kapoor from Memorial Hospital is on line 1, says, it's about the children's cardiac wing you funded last year." Edward picked up the phone, his mind still half on the plan spread across his desk. "Dr. Kapoor, what can I do for you?" "Mr. Patel, I wanted to personally thank you for your continued support," Dr. Kapoor said. "The new equipment you donated has made an enormous difference in our diagnostic capabilities." "Happy to help," Edward replied absently, his eyes still scanning building specifications. "In fact, just yesterday we used the new imaging system on a young patient, a 7-year-old girl with a suspected atrial septal defect. Without your equipment, we might have missed the severity of her condition." Edward's attention snapped fully to the conversation. A 7-year-old girl? The coincidence seemed too specific to ignore. "What was her name?" "I can't share patient information, of course," Dr. Kapoor said. "But I wanted you to know the real impact of your philanthropy. This child will need surgery, and thanks to your support we caught it before any permanent damage occurred." After hanging up, Edward sat motionless behind his desk. What were the chances? Memorial Hospital was the top cardiac facility in the city, the place where any child with a serious heart condition would be referred. A 7-year-old girl, just like Zara, Friday couldn't come quickly enough. When Edward arrived at Joey's pizzeria, Nisha was already there, looking even more exhausted than before. "How did the appointment go?" he asked after they ordered. Nisha's eyes filled with tears. "It's definitely a hole in her heart, an atrial septal defect, they called it. She needs surgery. The specialist was amazing, showed us everything on these incredible imaging machines." She took a shaky breath. "But my insurance won't cover all of it. They're calling it a pre-existing condition, only offering partial coverage." "How much is the surgery?" Edward asked carefully. "More than I can imagine affording." "Nearly $300,000, with all the care she'll need." Nisha wiped her eyes with a napkin. "But I'll figure it out. I've already started a fundraising page online and my parents are going to help. My coworkers are organizing a benefit. We'll find a way." Edward nodded, his mind racing. "I'm sure you will," he said gently. "Zara is lucky to have you fighting for her." All through dinner, as they talked about everyday things to keep Nisha's mind off her worries, Edward was making plans. For the first time since meeting her, He was grateful for his wealth and the influence it gave him. He finally had a chance to use it for something that truly mattered. The morning after their dinner, Edward sat in his office earlier than usual. The city was just waking up, streets below still quiet as sunlight gradually illuminated the skyline he had helped shape. But for once, buildings and business deals were far from his mind. He picked up his phone and called Dr. Kapoor directly. "Edward, Patel here. I need to discuss something important regarding a patient at your hospital, a 7-year-old girl named Zara who needs heart surgery." Dr. Kapoor sounded surprised. "Mr. Patel, as I mentioned yesterday, I can't discuss specific patients." "I understand completely," Edward interrupted. "I'm not asking for medical details. I want to make a donation to cover her treatment entirely, anonymously." There was a pause on the line. "That's extremely generous. May I ask why this particular case?" Edward hesitated. "Let's just say I've been given far more than I deserve in life. It's time I did something that truly matters." After working out the details, he added, "One more thing. I want the best specialists for this surgery. Spare no expense." Over the next few days, Edward moved quickly. He established a medical trust fund for Zara, ensuring that not only this surgery but any future medical needs would be covered. He called in favors from colleagues on Memorial Hospital's board to expedite the surgery date. All of it done through layers of lawyers and financial advisors to maintain his anonymity. The following Friday, Edward arrived at Joey's Pizzeria with a mixture of nervousness and anticipation. Nisha was already there, but something was different. Her face glowed with a joy he hadn't seen before. "Edward!" She jumped up when she saw him, nearly knocking over her water glass. "You won't believe what happened." His heart warmed at her excitement,
even though he knew exactly what had happened. "What is it?" "It's a miracle," she said, eyes shining. "The hospital called yesterday. An anonymous donor has paid for Zara's entire surgery, all of it. And they've arranged for the top pediatric
cardiac surgeon in the country to perform it. Edward forced his expression to register surprise. "That's amazing news." "There's more," Nisha continued, her voice filled with wonder. "They said the donor established a permanent medical trust for Zara. Any medical expenses she ever has will be covered." I keep pinching myself, thinking I must have dreamed it. Edward smiled. Sometimes good things happen to good people. But who would do something like this? Nisha shook her head in disbelief. The hospital administrator said the donor insisted on remaining anonymous. "I don't know anyone with that kind of money." "Perhaps it's someone who was touched by your story," Edward suggested carefully. "Or someone who believes in the work you do as a nurse." Nisha studied his face for a moment, her expression suddenly thoughtful. "That's an interesting theory." For a split second, Edward feared she had figured it out. But Nisha simply reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Whoever it was, I wish I could thank them. They've given my daughter her future back." Zara's surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Edward rearranged his entire week, canceling meetings and delegating critical decisions to his executive team. He told no one why. The morning of the surgery, he found himself sitting in the hospital waiting room, pretending to read a magazine while actually watching Nisha from across the room. She sat with her parents, a silver-haired couple who looked as anxious as she did. Occasionally, a nurse would come out with updates, and Edward would strain to overhear the information. 6 hours later, the surgeon finally emerged, still wearing his scrub cap. Edward watched as he approached Nisha and her parents, his heart pounding as he tried to read their expressions. When Nisha's hands flew to her mouth and her shoulders sagged in relief, Edward finally allowed himself to breathe. The surgery had been successful. Over the next 2 weeks, Edward maintained his distance, checking on Zara's progress through Dr. Kapoor. He sent a small gift to the hospital, a purple stuffed elephant with no card, knowing it was Zara's favorite color from their conversations. When Friday came around again, he almost didn't go to the pizzeria. What if Nisha had somehow discovered he was behind the donation? What if their relationship changed once she knew? The thought of losing the genuine connection they had formed made his stomach twist uncomfortably, but the thought of not seeing her was worse. When he arrived, Nisha was waiting in their usual booth. She looked tired but happy. The weight of worry finally lifted from her shoulders. "How is Zara doing?" he asked as he sat down. "Amazingly well," Nisha replied, her face softening. "The doctors say her recovery is ahead of schedule. She's already talking about going back to school." She laughed. "Actually, she's driving everyone at the hospital a little crazy, asking a million questions about the equipment and how the heart works. She's decided she definitely wants to be a doctor now." "She's going to make a great one," Edward said sincerely. Nisha nodded, then her expression turned serious. "Edward, there's something I need to ask you." His heart skipped a beat. "What is it?" "The anonymous donor," she began, studying his face carefully. "Was it you?" Edward froze. He hadn't prepared for such a direct question. He thought about denying it, maintaining the carefree friendship they had built. But looking into Nisha's eyes, he couldn't bring himself to lie to her. "How did you know?" he asked quietly. "I didn't. Not for sure," she said. "But there were clues. The way you asked about the costs, how you weren't surprised by the news, and then someone delivered a purple elephant to Zara, her favorite color, which I only ever mentioned to you." She took a deep breath. "But mostly, it was just a feeling. The timing of everything since we met, it felt connected somehow." Edward nodded slowly. "Yes, it was me, but I never wanted you to know." "Why not?" she asked. "Because," Edward struggled to find the words, "because the way you see me, just as Edward, the man you shared pizza with, it's been the most real thing in my life for years. I was afraid that would change if you knew the truth." Nisha tilted her head, confusion crossing her face. "The truth about what? That you're generous enough to help a child you barely know?" Edward realized she still didn't understand the full extent of it. "Nisha, my name is Edward Patel, the Patel of Patel Properties." He watched as recognition dawned in her eyes. Everyone in the city knew the Patel name. It was on buildings, in the news, part of the city's very skyline. "You're that Edward Patel?" she whispered. "The billionaire developer?" "Multi-millionaire," he corrected with a small smile. "But yes, that's me." Nisha sat back in the booth, visibly processing this revelation. For a long, agonizing moment, she said nothing. "I should have told you sooner," Edward said, filling the silence. I liked being just Edward with you. No one has seen me that way in a very long time." Nisha finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "All those Friday nights, you let me pay for my own pizza even though you could buy the entire restaurant." "You wouldn't have let me pay anyway," Edward pointed out. "You're stubborn that way." A small smile tugged at the corner of her mouth. "And the bus? You took the bus with us when you have a chauffeur?" "The bus was illuminating," Edward said honestly. "I hadn't been on public transportation in 40 years. Suddenly, Nisha started laughing, a genuine deep laugh that made heads turn in the restaurant. "I can't believe I gave a slice of pizza to one of the richest men in the city because I thought he looked hungry." Her laughter was contagious, and soon Edward found himself laughing too, the tension between them dissolving. "That pizza slice was the most valuable thing anyone has given me in decades," he said when they finally calmed down. "Not because of what it was, but because of why you gave it." Nisha reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for saving my daughter. I can never repay you for that." "You already have," Edward said softly. "You showed me what I'd been missing all these years. Real connection, simple moments that matter. You brought me back to life as surely as that surgeon helped Zara." Nisha squeezed his hand, her eyes bright with tears and something else, a warmth that made Edward's heart feel full. "So what happens now, Mr. Billionaire?" "That," Edward said, "is entirely up to you."